My Mafia boss husband said. Never touch me in public. Until he saw me with another man. The rule. The first rule of being married to Damien Voss was this. Never touch him in public. Not a hand on his arm. Not a brush of fingers at a dinner table. Not even the ghost of a glance that lingered a second too long. You stood beside him the way a shadow stands beside a flame, close enough to exist, distant enough not to burn. I learned this rule on the night of our wedding. We had just stepped out of the ceremony, a ceremony that had lasted precisely 42 minutes, attended by 12 people I didn't know and 2 lawyers I wasn't allowed to speak to, when his hand found the small of my back. It was the first and last time he touched me willingly in front of another human being. He guided me through the tall mahogany doors of the Rosso Grand Hotel, and the moment we crossed the threshold into the corridor, his hand dropped. Cold. Deliberate. Final. He didn't look at me when he spoke. In public, he said, his voice low and smooth as a blade being drawn from a velvet sheath, we are associates. Nothing more. Do you understand? I was 24 years old. My name was Alara Voss, formerly Alarician, and I had just married the most powerful, most dangerous, most devastatingly beautiful man in all of Castello City. And he had just told me, on our wedding night, that I was not allowed to touch him. What I didn't say was, fine. Because neither of us wanted this. What I also didn't say was, but what happens when everything changes? Because everything always changes. And with Damien Voss, change didn't come slowly. It came like a bullet through glass, sudden, irreversible, and leaving 1,000 glittering pieces of your old life scattered on the floor. Who he was. Let me tell you about Damien. Not the version the newspapers printed. Not the version whispered at charity galas, the one about the reclusive billionaire philanthropist, the mysterious CEO of Voss Meridian Group, the man who had rebuilt 3 failing cities with a single infrastructure deal and never once appeared on a magazine cover by choice. Let me tell you about the real Damien Voss. He was 32 years old. 6'2" of absolute, unnerving stillness, the kind of man who could stand in the center of a crowded room and make everyone in it feel like they were the ones intruding. His eyes were gray. Not a warm gray, not the soft gray of a morning sky. The gray of a storm that has already decided where it's going. His jaw was sharp enough to cut conversation dead, and he had this way of listening, not just hearing, but truly listening, that made you feel like every word you said was being filed somewhere you'd never have access to. He wore only black or charcoal. Always bespoke. Always perfect. The kind of clothes that didn't have wrinkles because they had been tailored by someone who understood that a man like Damien Voss did not tolerate imperfection. He had 2 phones, one for business, one for things I was never supposed to know about. He had a scar on the inside of his left wrist, thin and silver, that he never explained. He had a study on the 3rd floor of the Voss estate that he locked every night and opened every morning before I was awake. He had a driver named Felix who spoke 4 languages and had the eyes of a man who had seen things he would never discuss over dinner. And he had a rule about public affection that I now understood, after 6 months of this marriage, had nothing to do with coldness. It had to do with danger. Because Damien Voss was not simply a billionaire. He was not simply a CEO. He was the head of the Voss Syndicate, a network of business, power, and carefully maintained silence that stretched from Castello City to the corridors of 3 governments on 2 continents. And in that world, the people who loved you were the first to become targets. I didn't know that on our wedding night. I know it now. Who I was. My name is Alara. Before I became Alara Voss, I was Alarician, the second daughter of an architect who had made one catastrophic business decision, borrowed money from the wrong people, and left his daughters as collateral in a world they never asked to enter. I want to be clear, I am not a victim of this story. I am the narrator of it. I went into this marriage with open eyes and a clenched jaw. I knew what I was agreeing to. My father owed a debt that our family could not repay in money, and so it was repaid in alliance. My hand in marriage to Damien Voss settled a ledger that had been bleeding for 3 years. That was the transaction. That was the contract. What the contract didn't account for was me. I have a degree in architecture from Marennes University. I speak 3 languages. I can identify the vintage of a wine by smell, pick a lock with a bobby pin in under 40 seconds, and bake a soufflé that hasn't once collapsed. I read voraciously, history, psychology, behavioral economics, and I have a habit of noticing things that people don't expect me to notice. Things like the way Damien's jaw tightened when anyone mentioned the name Reyes. Things like the second phone he kept in the inside breast pocket of his jacket, never the outer one. Things like the way he stood just slightly in front of me whenever we entered a new room, never behind, never beside, always ahead. Always between me and the door. I noticed everything. And 6 months into this arrangement, this cold, silent, perfectly maintained arrangement, I was starting to notice something else entirely. I was starting to notice him. The unexpected meeting. It started on a Tuesday. I had taken to spending my mornings in the East Library, the one with the tall arched windows that looked out onto the formal garden, the one Damien never used because he preferred the darkness of his study. I had claimed it quietly, the way you claim territory in a house that isn't really yours, by leaving small pieces of yourself in it until it starts to feel like home. I had left a coffee mug, a stack of architectural journals, a half-finished sketch of a building I would never design, a potted plant named Gerald. It was enough. That Tuesday morning, I was deep in a book about Byzantine structural engineering when I heard the door open. I didn't look up immediately. The household staff moved through the rooms like ghosts. I had learned not to track every sound. But then the footsteps stopped. And the silence had weight to it. I looked up. Damien was standing in the doorway of the East Library, his library, technically, looking at Gerald the plant with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Surprise. Not the performative surprise of a man being polite. Real surprise. The involuntary kind. The kind that slips through before you can catch it. You named the plant, he said. Gerald seemed right, I said. A long pause. He looked at me. Then at Gerald. Then back at me. Gerald, he repeated, as if testing the word. He has a very reliable energy, I said. Something happened then. Something small and significant and almost invisible. The corner of Damien Voss's mouth, the left corner, the one closest to that silver scar, moved. Not a full smile. Not even close. But the suggestion of one. The ghost of one. He turned and left without another word. I stared at the empty doorway for a long time. Then I looked at Gerald. You did that, I told him. Gerald said nothing. He was, above all things, reliable. What I started to see. After the Gerald incident, things began to shift in ways I couldn't name. Not dramatically. Damien Voss did not do anything dramatically. He was a man of millimeters, of tiny, precise adjustments that only someone paying very close attention would ever catch. But I was paying very close attention. The coffee I drank every morning was a specific blend from a specific roaster in the Meridian district, Hazelwick and Sons, since 1923, their darkest roast with exactly no milk and half a spoon of raw sugar. I had mentioned it once, offhandedly, to the housekeeper Mrs. Alcott in the first week of my arrival. 3 weeks later, it appeared in the kitchen without comment. I asked Mrs. Alcott about it. Mr. Voss arranged it, she said, and moved on as if this were entirely unremarkable. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding the bag of Hazelwick coffee, feeling something I didn't have a name for yet. There were other things. An architectural exhibition I had mentioned wanting to attend appeared in my weekly schedule, already confirmed, 2 tickets. A rare out-of-print book on Venetian Renaissance building techniques arrived on my desk with no note. When I mentioned, once, at dinner, that the East Wing hallway felt dark and I had trouble reading there in the evenings, new lighting fixtures appeared within 48 hours. He never acknowledged any of it. He never once said, "I noticed you like this. I did this for you." But he did it. Quietly. Precisely. The way he did everything. I began to understand that Damien Voss had 2 languages. The one he spoke aloud, minimal, guarded, professionally cold, and the one he spoke through action. And the second language was saying things the first one never would. The question was, why? And more urgently, more terrifyingly, why was I starting to care about the answer? I went looking for clues the way an architect approaches a building of unknown origin, methodically, respectfully, always aware that some structures are load-bearing and pulling the wrong thread brings everything down. I found his business history, meticulously constructed and almost certainly partially fabricated. An obituary for a woman named Marguerite Voss, his mother, that described her as a devoted community figure, but listed no community, no friends, no surviving family beyond him. A photograph in the study, the unlocked outer study, not the inner one, of two young boys, maybe 8 and 10, standing in front of a building I recognized from my architecture journals as the old Voss family warehouse in the industrial district. Demolished in 2009. 2 boys. One of them was clearly Damien, that jaw, even at 10, unmistakable. The other boy I didn't recognize. I asked Felix about it once, casually, as he drove me to the exhibition. Felix's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. "That's not a conversation for me to have with you, Mrs. Voss." It was the gentlest refusal I had ever been given. And it told me everything. There was a ghost in this house. Not the supernatural kind. The kind made of grief and old choices and a secret held so long it had become structural, load-bearing, immovable, defining the shape of everything around it. And somewhere in that ghost was the answer to why Damien Voss had rules about public affection. The night of the gala. The Castello City Philanthropic Gala was held every November in the Grand Meridian Ballroom, 400 people, black tie, the kind of event that existed to give powerful people a beautiful room in which to pretend they liked each other. Damien attended every year. This year, he attended with me. I wore midnight blue. Long, simple, no embellishment, because I had learned, in 6 months, that Damien noticed excess and I wanted him to notice the absence of it. My hair was up. My heels were 3 inches. I had borrowed nothing and borrowed nobody's version of myself. This was the Alara I had assembled on my own terms, in the mirror of the East Wing bathroom, alone. When I came down the main staircase, Damien was standing in the foyer in black tie, checking his phone. He looked up when he heard my heels on the marble. He looked at me for exactly 3 seconds. Then he put his phone away. "You're ready," he said. "I am," I said. He opened the front door for me. In the car, he was quiet, but it was a different quiet than usual. It was a listening quiet, not a closed one. When I mentioned that the gala's event designer had recently pivoted to biophilic design principles, he turned slightly toward me in the back seat, and I watched him actually absorb what I was saying. Biophilic, he repeated. Designing with natural elements, light, plants, organic forms, to reduce stress response. It's being used a lot in high-pressure corporate environments now. Makes people feel less like they're in a cage. A pause. And does it work? On most people. He was quiet again. Then, very quietly, "I'll have someone look into it for the East Wing." My heart did something entirely inconvenient. The gala was exquisitely horrible. 400 people smiling at each other with architectural precision while negotiating things in the silences between sentences. I stayed close to Damien's side, never touching, as required, always within 2 feet, and watched him work the room the way a chess grandmaster works a board. Controlled. Inevitable. But then, somewhere around the 2nd hour, something happened. A woman approached us. Tall, blonde, Damien's age, with a smile that had been calibrated for maximum damage. She had the particular confidence of someone who knew something about you that you hadn't told them. "Damien," she said, warmly. Too warmly. "Sophia," he said. Cold. The specific cold of someone who has made a decision about a person and is maintaining it. She looked at me with the openly appraising look of a woman who has decided you are not a threat, which is the most dangerous kind. And this must be the wife. "Ilara?" "Mrs. Voss," I said pleasantly. She smiled. Her eyes didn't. "How delightful. Damien, we need to talk about the Reyes situation. Privately." I watched Damien's profile. There it was, that tightening of the jaw at the name Reyes. Almost imperceptible. But I was looking for it. "This isn't the place," he said. "It never is with you." She walked away. I said nothing. He said nothing. But a few minutes later, his hand found my elbow, just briefly, just the lightest touch, guiding me away from the direction Sophia had gone. Like he was steering me away from something without saying what it was. In the car home, I asked, "Who is Reyes?" Silence. Long, heavy. "Someone from before," he said finally. "Before what?" He turned to look at me. Really look at me. In the low light of the car, his grey eyes were almost black. "Before everything," he said. And then he looked away. I filed the name Reyes in the same place I kept the photograph of the two boys. And I started being afraid of what I was going to find. Part 7. What the locked study held. The key was in the Chinese jade box on his dresser. I found it at 4 in the morning, 3 weeks after the gala, when I couldn't sleep and was walking the halls the way I sometimes did when the house felt too large and too quiet and too full of things I didn't understand. I didn't pick the lock. I want to be clear about that. The key was simply there, as if it had been left. As if, on some level, the door had been left open for me. I stood outside his study for 4 minutes. Then I went in. The room smelled of cedar and old paper. One wall was entirely windows, overlooking the north garden. One wall was entirely files, not digital, physical files, floor to ceiling. One wall held a single framed photograph, large, printed on matte paper, hung at eye level. I looked at the photograph first. It was the two boys again. But closer now, I could see their faces clearly. Damien, younger, with his arm around the other boy. The other boy was smaller. He had Damien's jaw but softer eyes and hair that went in 3 directions at once. He was laughing at something off camera. Damien was looking at him the way a person looks at something they are terrified of losing. Below the photograph, in small, neat letters on a placard. Marco Voss. 1991 to 2017. A brother. Damien had a brother. Had. Past tense. I sat down on the floor of the locked study, in the dark, and I stayed there for a long time. I went to the files next. I didn't read everything, there was too much, and I understood quickly that what I was looking at was not just a filing system. It was a life's work. Years of careful documentation, the Voss syndicate's operations, yes, but also something else. A separate file. Thick. Red. Labeled in Damien's own handwriting. Reyes, outstanding. I opened it. It took me 20 minutes to understand what I was reading. And then it took me another 20 minutes to stop shaking. Mafia Reyes, not a business rival, not a political opponent, not an abstract threat. A man. A specific man. The man who had ordered the killing of Marco Voss in 2017 in what had been staged as a car accident and had been accepted as one by everyone except his brother, who had spent 8 years quietly, methodically, irrefutably building a case. The rule about public affection wasn't coldness. It was armor. For me. If Mafia Reyes ever discovered that Damien Voss had something, someone, he cared about, that person became leverage. And leverage, in Reyes's hands, became a body. I stood in the locked study with the red file in my hands and I understood, with total clarity, what this marriage was. Not a cold transaction. A shield. He had married me to protect me, to keep me inside the perimeter of his name and his resources, while simultaneously keeping me at arm's length so that Reyes would never identify me as the weapon to use against him. He had been protecting me from the moment I walked through his door. And I had spent 6 months being angry about it. The morning I broke the rule. I didn't sleep. I put the file back. I locked the study. I put the key back in the jade box and I went to the East Library and I sat with Gerald for 3 hours watching the sky change color over the formal garden. When Damien came downstairs at 6:30, as he always did, dressed and immaculate and already carrying the second phone, I was waiting in the corridor. He stopped when he saw me. "Ilara. I know about Marco," I said. The stillness that came over him was different from his usual stillness. This was the stillness of a man who has just watched the ground shift under his feet and has not yet decided whether to run or to stand. "You went into the study. The key was on your dresser." "It's always on my dresser." A long pause. He looked at me, and in his grey eyes I saw something I had never seen there before. Not anger. Not calculation. Fear. Not for himself. How much did you read? Enough. He turned away. His hand found the doorframe. His jaw was tight. You should have stayed out of it. You left the key on the dresser, Damien. Silence. Long. The kind of silence that holds a conversation that neither person has the vocabulary for yet. You could have been hurt, he said finally. Quiet. Like a confession. You've been hurt, I said. He turned back to look at me. And I did something I had never done in 6 months of marriage. I walked across the corridor and I put my hand on his arm. In the house. Not in public. Just the two of us, in the morning light, and my hand on his forearm over his jacket sleeve. He looked down at my hand. He looked up at my face. Don't, he said. But it wasn't a command. It was almost a plea. I'm not afraid of you, I said. You should be. I know everything and I'm still standing here. He was quiet for a long time. Then he did the most unexpected thing Damien Voss had ever done in my presence. He put his free hand over mine. On his arm. Just for a moment. Just long enough that I felt the warmth of it, the weight of it. Then he stepped back. Felix will take you to the Aldrin Gallery today. There's an exhibit on modernist structures you mentioned last week. He walked away. I stood in the corridor for a long time, holding the warmth of his hand against mine, even though it was already gone. The man at the gallery. The Aldrin Gallery was beautiful. 3 floors of light and space and architecture treated as art rather than function. I had been there twice before the marriage, once with a professor and once alone, and I had loved it both times. Today, I was distracted. I moved through the exhibits with the physical motions of someone looking while the interior machinery of my mind was running something else entirely. Damien. Marco. Reyes. The key on the dresser. The hand on my hand. I was standing in front of a striking brutalist model, grey concrete, sharp angles, brutally honest about what it was, when someone stepped up beside me. It's the Nakamura building in Osaka, said a voice. Male. Light. The voice of someone who had been trained to make you feel at ease immediately. I turned. He was handsome. That was the first thing. Conventionally, straightforwardly handsome in a way that was entirely unthreatening and therefore, in my current state of mind, entirely disarming. Dark hair, warm brown eyes, the open smile of a man who had never needed to learn calculation. I know, I said. Brutalism is the most honest architecture there is. It doesn't pretend to be anything it isn't. He smiled. Exactly. I'm Luca, by the way.